When it comes to the most divisive director working today, the one who seems to inspire the most extreme and passionate reactions, Zack Snyder probably fits the bill the most. Personally, I don't feel strongly either way about his films. Some of them I like, while others I've been underwhelmed by. However, something I don't understand is why he gets such intense vitriolic hate. A lot of people get unnecessarily cruel when they talk about his work, with a good number attacking him as a person beyond what shows up on the screen. And I don't think that's right. So I'm going to explain what I think makes Zack Snyder a talented filmmaker and why I think some go too far. The first thing that comes to mind when I think of Zack Snyder is impressive visuals. He treats film as the visual medium it is, and puts an enormous amount of thought into how his movies look and the worlds presented. And I think that's his strongest asset. He seems to view the camera as an important tool, and while he has been accused of using slow motion a lot, I think he changes things up more than he's given credit for. When he adapted the graphic novel 300, he filmed it entirely in front of green screens. That gave him control over the environment and allowed him to create a lot of striking images that added to the enjoyment of the film. However, when he directed his next graphic novel adaptation, Watchmen, he utilized a lot more physical sets in order to portray the alternate 1980s presented in the film. The result was the two films looking very distinct from each other. Even his two Superman movies look different from one another. His animated film, Legend of the Guardians: The Owls of Ga'Hoole, is also one of the most visually impressive animated movies I've seen, with Snyder working closely with Animal Logic to craft amazing flying scenes with those owls. I also find he has a good eye for action. 300 consists of a series of battle sequences, which should get old quickly. However, Snyder makes sure not to repeat things, and the fight choreography proved very impressive. In Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman, he put a lot of emphasis on the weight of the characters, especially when two strong beings go up against each other. Snyder is often accused of just putting a lot of things in his movies because they look cool. He himself has even admitted in interviews that does play a role in what he puts on screen. And I honestly don't see the problem with this. He clearly has an active imagination and views cinema as a way to help put many of his wild ideas into the world. Snyder's films are also criticized for being empty spectacles and how there is not a whole lot under the surface. I have to say I don't agree with that, and if you watch his interviews he talks about the themes he wants to explore in his work. Something like 300 may seem like it's just an over-exaggerated account of this famous battle, which it is. However, I also thought the film had a clear message about brotherhood and the ways in which war can unfortunately keep people separated from their family. Watchmen especially seems to get a divided reaction, with many saying he missed the point of the source material. That's fair, since the changes made to an adaptation can sometimes not align with one's own interpretation of the original story. I still thought the film was an obvious deconstruction of superheroes, and how even those who seek to do good have a dark side that does not always match their public image. Now, if you were to ask me what my favorite Zack Snyder film is, it's actually his first one, Dawn of the Dead. I even prefer it over the original film, which I know sounds blasphemous to some, but I really liked his take. His remake popularized the controversial depiction of fast-moving zombies, but I found that added to the excitement and to the necessity of the characters needing to get out of that shopping center. In between the zombie scenes, I really like how most of the film is almost like a play, as we watch these conflicting personalities interact and attempt to figure out the best use of their time in this enclosed location. As you can see, I do like some of his movies, namely Dawn of the Dead, 300, Man of Steel, and Batman vs. Superman. That does not mean everything has won me over. While I think Watchmen has some thought-provoking themes and amazing visuals, I do find the script too talky. As I said, Legend of the Guardians is a beautiful-looking movie, but I did not think the characters were all that interesting. Army of the Dead made a lot of creative use of the zombies, but I thought the large ensemble of characters ended up being mere archetypes, and there was too much time spent on setup. By far my least favorite Snyder film is Sucker Punch. To me it just felt like a series of interconnected music videos, and I think it's his most visually ugly film. I guess that's on purpose, to show the drab world these women live in, and I understand he was satirizing the way fantasy properties fetishize female characters. Sucker Punch was just too much of a sensory overload for me. I have not watched his cut of Justice League yet, but I never blamed him for the shortcomings of a theatrical cut. How can you, when so much of his work was reportedly thrown out, and a director with a completely different sensibility came in and changed everything? For a while, the general consensus on Zack Snyder seemed to be that he was a director with an eye for visuals and big action scenes, and audiences and even many critics seemed okay with that. And then he decided to make a Superman movie. The reaction to Man of Steel was very divisive, and things seemed to get worse when Batman vs. Superman was released. A lot of people thought he ruined Superman and did not understand the character, and I started reading so many overdramatic comments and hateful remarks thrown his way. There were certainly valid criticisms, but they seemed to be drowned out by those who called him a hack or worse. I personally think he provided his own unique interpretation of the character, one who has been interpreted in different ways by various comic book writers, filmmakers, and television showrunners since Superman's debut over 80 years ago. I also don't think Snyder strayed as far as people think. He was still a Kryptonian named Kal-El, who was put in a pod and sent to Earth when his planet exploded, and then grew up as Clark Kent in Kansas. He then wore a red and blue outfit so he could try to save people with his extraordinary powers. The hallmarks of the characters were still there, but I guess there were people who thought he didn't smile too much. A lot of the comments that have come up, even from professional journalists and critics, even went so far as to call him a terrible person with a giant ego and other such claims. There was a lot of trying to psychoanalyze him as a person based on what was put on screen, which does not seem fair to me. One thing that has come up is saying he holds Randian beliefs. Where did this originate from? Well, this mainly seems to come from his desire to adapt Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead. Snyder said that he admires her writing, but he has also said that she, and I quote, fell victim to her own popularity and drank her own Kool-Aid. So he's not a total fanboy of hers. I have not read The Fountainhead, but this is what I gather from the plot synopsis. The book centers on an architect with grand ambitions for his creations, but is forced by others to make them more conventional. Now, I wonder why Zack Snyder would find this story appealing. People have thus applied Randian readings on his superhero movies, but I've never gotten that impression. Ayn Rand's philosophy was about rejecting selflessness and only doing things for your own gain. But Superman is shown wanting to help others, both with his superpowers and in his role as a journalist. If anything, Superman's frustrations come from the distrust others have of him, and others assuming he holds Randian beliefs, ironically enough. I was actually curious to see Snyder's adaptation of The Fountainhead, as he's only ever directed action films, and this would have been his first straight drama. However, he revealed in a recent interview that he will not be making it anymore because of the political cloud that hangs over Rand's work, and he did not want people making assumptions about his beliefs. I mentioned this before in my Batman vs. Superman defense video, but it's worth repeating. When I saw people saying these horrible things about Snyder, I decided to do my own research, including watching a number of his interviews. And the impression I got was that he is just a passionate filmmaker who feels strongly about his vision. Critics of his work think he has an ego, but in frequent interviews, Snyder makes a point of praising the work of his collaborators, and does not seem to take credit for other people's ideas. But maybe he's terrible to work with. And so I went searching, and all I found was one story after another about how he's one of the nicest people in Hollywood. Everyone from actors to writers to visual effects artists to even executives he's creatively clashed with have said how much they enjoy working with him and how genuinely friendly he is. When we have proof of actual monsters in the film industry, why are we going after this man? It really perplexes me that some people talk or tweet about him like he ran over their cat or something. The next thing I should probably address is his fanbase, who are certainly an enthusiastic bunch. Where do they come from, and why have so many cropped up over the past few years? Well, I have a theory, and it has to do with Batman. Whenever a director makes a Batman movie, a very passionate fanbase sometimes follows. Happened with Tim Burton, and then later Christopher Nolan, and it seems like it's followed suit with Snyder. After the release of the director's cut of Batman vs. Superman, that's when I noticed the massive adoration pop up. It's easy to categorize these Snyder fans as overexcited. They keep propping him up as one of the greatest directors ever, and a genius who always makes flawless work. Now, I have my favorite directors too, like Charlie Chaplin and Stanley Kubrick and Steven Spielberg. But even when I praise them, I try to keep it tempered. I love and respect their work, but I don't think they're infallible beings, and I don't view them as deities. They just make films that greatly appeal to me, and I consider them some of the best storytellers in this still fairly young medium. If you feel the same about Zack Snyder, that's great. I just see a lot of memes appear with Snyder's face on Jesus' body, and while I know many of them are in jest, I'm sure there are those who take these seriously. Now, his fans have done a lot of really good things, like raising money for suicide prevention. However, it's also difficult to ignore the more toxic variety of fans out there, who unfortunately drown out the good fans, the ones who get angry at people who provide criticisms of his films. Snyder himself has even called out this type of fan for this unacceptable behavior. I read a review of the Snyder Cut of Justice League that, while not a positive assessment, was still very sympathetic towards Snyder, with a good chunk of it devoted to how he did not deserve the behind-the-scenes troubles associated with the theatrical cut. And yet, this critic still got hate for that review. You're free to like his films, but it's not the end of the world if a critic does not like the same superhero movie or action movie. And let's talk about that hashtag. I understand why Release the Snyder Cut became a thing, with even the actors tweeting it out and showing support for it happening. The Snyder Cut was eventually completed and released, and I'm happy Snyder got to make the film. But there is such a thing as overdoing it, and spamming Warner Brothers' social media accounts is an example of overdoing it. They could make a post celebrating an actor who just passed away, and there would be scores of Release the Snyder Cuts in the replies. At a certain point, whoever runs the WB's social media is no longer checking the notifications. And now there's a new hashtag called Restore the Snyderverse, and that confuses me for a few reasons. The first is that even with Snyder no longer involved, his contributions to the DC Universe will still remain. Jason Momoa, Gal Gadot, and Ezra Miller appear to be on deck to play the superheroes Snyder cast them as for a while, and Ben Affleck is even returning to play Batman in The Flash. Some of the directors, like James Wan, Patty Jenkins, and David F. Sandberg, have also shown an eagerness to continue utilizing elements introduced in Snyder's films. The other thing is that many fans complain about the treatment he was given at Warner Brothers, especially on Justice League, and Snyder himself has revealed the studio heads are not all that interested in him returning to the DC fold. So why would you want him to return to WB? Especially with Netflix allowing him to do whatever he wanted on Army of the Dead. And they're so enthusiastic about the film, there's already a prequel movie and an animated series on the way. Zack Snyder seems a lot happier working at Netflix than he has been with Warner Brothers on his past few projects. Collaborating with Netflix is a win-win for both him as a filmmaker and for the viewers who want to see him have complete creative freedom on his movies. It's true that he's not everyone's favorite director, but there are several who go way too overboard with their comments about him and make things too personal. I've even seen some get annoyed and accuse him of hating fun because Cyborg does not say booyah in his cut of Justice League. There are valid reasons to criticize his films. The lack of a catchphrase is not one of them. I think he is a director with an enormous amount of talent who appears to put a lot of thought into his films, and he is definitely passionate about the material he's working with, whether he's adapting a comic book or coming up with his own concept. He's someone who I will always be curious what he decides to do in the future, and I'm looking forward to him entering this new phase of his career at Netflix. See you next time.